Hi and welcome to another piano comparison video here at Merriam Pianos on YouTube. Today we're looking at Kawai's K500 and comparing it to an instrument which some of you may not be familiar with, the Fridolin F130. This is a product from Schimmel. It's somewhat new to the market and it's an instrument that we've been asked about a few times here on the floor and specifically how we thought it compared to the K500. So what better way to respond to that question by with a video. So that's exactly what we're going to be doing today. We're going to be playing both instruments, talking about their design features, the differences, the similarities, and just sharing with you some of those observations and perspectives. Hopefully add a new dimension and possibly a new entry into your piano shopping process, piano shopping experience. So if this is the first time that you have stopped by our channel, we would really appreciate, before we go any further, if you did subscribe, hit that notification bell, and we hope that you enjoy the video. So without further ado, let's get started with the K500 and the F130 right away. We're going to begin in front of the Fridolin, the F130T. So this is approximately a 51-inch piano. And the reason that we are doing this comparison is that we actually had a customer who came in, asked us the question, like, how does the K500 compare to the F130? And I kind of drew a blank because I realized that it wasn't a piano that I had a particularly deep understanding of. And so since that question got asked several weeks ago, I've now had an opportunity to do all kinds of digging, all kinds of research, and spend quite a bit of time in front of an F130. And now we're able to actually bring this comparison and some of these perspectives to you out there, because if that customer is asking, there's a good chance that a few other people out in the marketplace are also asking. It's also kind of nice to be able to compare the Kawai to something other than Yamaha, because whether I'm going at this from the Yamaha angle and looking for a comparable Kawai, or the Kawai angle looking for comparable Yamaha, I mean, it almost gets a little bit tired having that sort of duopoly in the marketplace constantly represented in these reviews. And I'm always looking for some interesting alternatives to talk to people about and introduce them to. The Fridolin, just for some background, falls into a very small but certainly a growing number of instruments that are kind of a hybrid product between a European company as well as a Chinese manufacturer. And I would say the three best known examples of that at this point would be the Bechstein Zimmermann, the Fridolin Schimmel, as well as the Essex, which is a Steinway brand, but again, it's a collaboration with a Chinese manufacturer. And it's always been a little bit hit and miss when it comes to the success of these products. And I was always a little bit skeptical of the approach anyway. And I think that comes from throughout the 80s and well into the 90s, early 2000s, it became very, very popular for importers and distributors to basically just slap some kind of a German/European sounding brand on what otherwise was pretty much just a generic Chinese, what they called a stencil piano. And so the descriptions were always very florid and romantic, talking about you know, the history of the design. But I mean, all of that aside, it was more or less just a baseline generic Chinese instrument of poor to, you know, maybe mid-range, if we're being very generous, quality, with a stencil brand on it. And that was about it. And so when we started to evolve out of that paradigm in the manufacturing business, and there were genuine design collaborations happening, I was one of the last people to really believe that we were getting a different type of a product. But we are 10 years past that really, and we've turned a corner, and now we have a few instruments on the market that genuinely have been highly collaborative and really truly are taking advantage of European design, European engineering, in a lot of cases European parts and materials, and we're marrying that with Chinese factories, which are really getting their act together in terms of quality control, consistency, and refinement in terms of voicing, in terms of regulation. And so the Fridolin represents really one of the absolute best examples of this. And in doing so, I think presents a credible alternative to Japanese piano. In a lot of cases, this brings to the market something that even Indonesian factories haven't quite been able to achieve, which is that, I guess, the European design refinement that can come straight from one of the top-end German manufacturers. So here we have the Fridolin 130. So this is the largest instrument in the lineup. There is a 123, it's a 121, and there's also a 116. And so the K500 is the closest instrument to this. Musically speaking, it's worlds apart from the K500, which is a great thing, because if we're talking about providing customers with a true alternative, it doesn't do much good to simply have something with a different label on it, something that comes out of a different factory, but more or less musically is gunning for exactly the same experience. This really isn't. The attack is different. The whole character of the piano is different. The types of frequencies that the cabinet is resonating at is different. It's the whole thing just is a different musical experience. Thank goodness. And so let's get into the specifics of what we're hearing. I'm going to play a little bit for you right now so you at home can hear it. We are miking this instrument with two large diaphragm mics. We've got them about 1.5 feet, 2 feet back from the soundboard. And other than that, no effects whatsoever. We haven't compressed it. We haven't EQ'd it. Nothing. You are getting the raw audio. So here is a playing sample of the F130. I'm not sure how much design is contributing to this, but a quality that I find across a lot of the Schimmels is this wonderful harmonic wash. And so I don't describe it as a lack of clarity. It's not like it ever feels murky or that you know, the individual tones are not defined, but there is this beautiful, lovely, lush wash that you get out of the instrument. It's almost like a built-in reverberant effect, a harmonic effect in there. It's quite unusual on an upright piano to have any sort of duplex scaling, but Schimmel has what I would describe as an untuned duplex scale in the treble. And this is something that's actually found as well in the K500. In that respect, it makes both of these instruments quite unique for this price range and for an upright, generally speaking. And so for those who aren't familiar with the expression duplex, what duplex scaling is it allows, and on an upright it's going to be a pretty short length of string, but it allows some length of string on the other side of either the capo or the bridge to be free to resonate or to free to kind of sympathetically generate some additional upper harmonics. And what that can do, the effect that it has on a grand, is to thicken the treble. It can really add quite a bit of complexity or, depending on how they do the duplex, sort of a more almost like air around the note as you play it. So a very different behavior in the treble than what you get on the K500. The K500 certainly is it's a drier treble. It's a more precise treble in some ways. I would say that the action on the K500 certainly gives you a little more control in your lower dynamic ranges, but that control difference disappears somewhat as soon as you kind of get up into a normal, like a medium, a mezzo forte or above type of a dynamic range. So in that regard, I'd say the Fridolin has an action which kind of reminds me almost of like a Yamaha. This feels like I'm kind of playing like a Yamaha U3 in terms of its touch. But the sound up in that treble, really lots of very interesting colors and shades and shimmer that you're getting. In the mid-range of the piano, as a balance between what you're getting from the soundboard response versus what you're getting more as a cabinet response, there's a lot more cabinet response out of the Fridolin than what I get out of the Kawai. The Kawai, I get tons of soundboard, which means I'm hearing lots of very direct, very concentrated tone on the attack of the note, but it's less of an ambient, less of an acoustic effect. On the Fridolin, I'm getting less a specific focused tone coming off the soundboard, and I'm feeling like I'm getting tone really emanating out of the entire structure of the instrument. And when you look at the back of the piano, I can see some of the design contribution that might be causing that. There are more back posts, thicker back posts, and lighter, more resonant back posts on the Fridolin than what you see on the Kawai. So when I look at the Kawai, I look at a structure that's really built to provide a lot of structural stability, but more or less keep a lot of the energy focused into the soundboard. Whereas on the Fridolin, if I'm not mistaken, what I'm seeing there are actually spruce back posts. Somebody can correct me on that if I've got that wrong, because Fridolin doesn't, or Schimmel doesn't specifically disclose what those back posts are made of, but I'm pretty sure I'm recognizing what looks like spruce grain on those back posts, and they're solid as well. So we're not talking about laminated posts. So we're really looking at a whole structure that's designed to be highly active and responsive to that vibrational input from the soundboard, from the soundboard in the rim. Another element that's quite obvious is a great sustain. The Kawai uses a tapered soundboard, and it's a Sitka variety of soundboard. So it tends to be it's just a different character than the white spruce. This is an Austrian white spruce that goes on the Fridolin. And white spruce tends to have a slightly tighter grain. You usually are able to you have to dry the Austrian white spruce a little bit less, so it tends to be a little more reactive. And there's this mid-range purity that you tend to get out of white spruce that's a little bit difficult to achieve on Sitka, which usually gives off a lot more color in your bass and your treble, but the mid is somewhat less interesting in the mid-range. Continuing on down, Anybody who's been watching acoustic reviews from me over the last several years, and certainly the last few, know that one of the things I tend to judge an acoustic by is how well it manages that transition between the steel and the brass. It has a lot to do with how well it's scaled. It really exposes the quality of the bass strings, or how choosy or picky they are with the bass strings that they throw on there. I call it the break. I have no idea if anyone else in the whole piano industry refers to this as the break, but I do. It's that point at which it transitions from the trichord steel into the copper. And this piano does it brilliantly. My camera guy, Lee, is nodding his head in the back because he's hearing it too. He's like, yeah, that's smooth as butter. The reason that's great to hear on an upright piano is that when you get into more advanced, particularly advanced classical playing that has been written on a large grand piano, a lot of composers demand things out of the instrument which requires clarity in virtually all ranges. And so when you're playing on instruments where you're going to have a lot of melodic focus, or even just any kind of a crunchy sort of harmonic texture in this range, you know, anything from middle C down an octave and a half to 2 octaves, and you've got a break or a transition zone where 2 or 3 of the notes are just throwing off crazy uncontrolled harmonics, honestly, it can ruin the experience. I've had people try to return pianos because they were working on one specific piece where there was one critical melodic note somewhere in the middle of that piece, and the piano, it was an inherent design issue with the piano. It wasn't that specific unit. There was nothing we could do. We couldn't voice it out, couldn't do anything about, we even replaced a bass string to try and resolve it. It's just a fundamental scaling issue. And that wasn't unusual. This is something that's really common on upright pianos, particularly when you're not talking about high-end German pianos. This happens all the time, especially 48-inch, 46-inch pianos and below. You've got to be really picky and choosy with that region. So I realize I'm droning on a bit about this issue, but all I'm saying is they've done a brilliant job of making sure the scale and the transition here produces a flawless range, flawless spectrum of tone through that range. Now we'll get right down into the bass. I love the bottom fifth. This is where, there's going to be pros and cons to both these instruments. Here's one area where I really prefer what I get out of the Kawai on the K500, just in that particular spot. Below the break, but above that bottom fifth where you get into your single copper bass strings. Little bit lacking in power down here. Not necessarily a clarity issue, just straight up power. And that's something that might be able to be improved with a bit of voicing, adding a little bit of hardener just to the shoulder of those hammers to give it a little bit more mass. Speaking of hammers, one of the last technical issues that I'm going to touch on this piano is the fact that it's also got mahogany hammers. This is, again, it's not totally unique, like the Kawais use it, but if we're talking about this price range, most pianos are not going to have a mahogany hammer until you get up into the $15,000 to $20,000 price range. It's a little more money. Most manufacturers aren't going to spring the bucks. And if you don't have a piano good enough to take advantage of that slightly lighter hammer, what's the point other than just a talking point for your customers? But this is not really the case here. We've got an instrument that's certainly able to take advantage of a lighter hammer. It gets off the string faster. Ultimately, the lighter the hammer, the less distortion that hammer is likely to cause if all other things are considered equal. So that's the 130. Here's an instrument which comes in fairly close to the same price range as a K500. Probably in most markets going to be a little bit less, but not like crazy dramatically less. It's approximately the same size. It's an instrument that has a fairly colorful treble, not going to be as punchy or as powerful a treble, but certainly has a beautiful shimmer and lots of color, washy color up in the top range of the instrument. The mid-range is really beautifully resonant. It's not quite the bell-like tone you would get out of a full German piano of this size, but you still get an outsized amount of cabinet resonance out of this instrument, and that produces quite a unique tonal profile. And then headed down into the bass, a really gorgeous transition and nice clarity. Not a huge thumpy bass, but very well balanced overall. So, you know, who's this piano going to be good for? I think this is an instrument that by and large is built to a quality that's well in excess of what you should expect out of sort of a basic Japanese piano or even a mid-range Japanese piano. They've really got that part nailed. The quality control coming out of the Pearl River factory with this particular project, it's an all Schimmel design. This is not just sort of a warmed over Pearl River instrument with a Schimmel logo slapped on it. This is a piano genuinely designed from the ground up from Schimmel and built by the Pearl River. Their own hammers, the mahogany hammers. So this is an instrument that is going to appeal to a lot of personal players who I would say aren't at a super high classical level. There's a few things in here that I think the K500 is better suited for in terms of high level classical. But if you are playing sort of pop, adult contemporary, mid-range classical, getting an instrument that you just like the tone of more for your kids starting out or yourself starting out, I think this is such an interesting choice. And you won't know for sure until you're playing it and say the K500 side by side, maybe in a showroom somewhere, or this versus a Yamaha U3 in a showroom somewhere. But if anything else, my hope with this comparison is simply to put on the radar. Make sure that you're aware that something like this is out there so that you go hunting for it and investigate it. Because like I said, there's really only 3 instruments to me that fall in this category of successful execution of a true European design with a Chinese manufacturer. And it would be this one, the Steinway Essex, and the Zimmermann Bechstein. So we are going to head over to the K500, do our comparison on that one. And once again, thank you so much for being with us. It's so fun to always be sharing new instruments and new perspectives with you. So we'll be back in just a quick second. Thanks for sticking with us. So we've rolled the K500 into place. I should mention that it's literally in exactly the same place, in exactly the same room, with exactly the same mic placement. So I mean, you cannot get a more apples to apples comparison in terms of the sound capture and what we're putting on this video. So the K500 is part of Kawai's K series. This is a piano that is made and designed entirely by Japan. This is a part of the line of pianos that received a substantial redesign right around the time that the GL series came out, just a little bit before. It basically was released around the same time or just after the GX and before the GL. So really a virtual redesign of almost all of Kawai acoustic piano products that started and around 2012 and rolled out over the next 3 to 4 years after that. The K500 is not quite a 52-inch piano. It's about the same size as the Fridolin F130 that we were just looking at. And it squeezes in the line between the K400, which is a 48-inch, and the K800, which is actually a 53-inch. So this instrument gets compared most often to Yamaha's U3, but like I said in the first part of the video, I really enjoy bringing new and interesting options to people's attention when I think it's deserving of being put on a list as an alternative. You know, there's lots that I like about the K500. There's lots that I like more about this piano than the Fridolin 130, but there are aspects of the 130 that I enjoy more than the K500. So it's really more of a subjective preference, and the role of this video is not for me to come out and say which one is better. I know there are some viewers that really like a reviewer to come out and say, well, I've played this one and this is definitely the best one. And I get it. There are times where those videos are more helpful. To me, the purpose of these videos is more to bring to your attention something that I think should be a part of the shopping process and highlight the differences so that when you are out doing your own shopping, maybe I've helped to clarify some of those points of comparison a little bit more. So on the K500, you have a very different beast. This is a more powerful piano for sure. I would also describe it as a little bit more colorful. So there's a few things that are contributing to that. So some of that is definitely coming from the tapered soundboard. And what a tapered soundboard does is it just makes more of the soundboard active than would otherwise be if you were looking at a flat soundboard. Now, all soundboards have a bit of a crown. So when I say flat, I'm not referring to the fact that it doesn't have a bit of curvature. I guess I'm just meaning that there's an equal thickness throughout the entire soundboard versus a taper where it gets thinner towards the outside, requires less energy to create activation as you get closer to the edges. So you just get more of it happening. There are some risks that come along with tapering a soundboard. It can be a little easier to distort sometimes, and you can also wind up with less tuning stability if you don't engineer it right, if you don't scale it right. But Kawai's been doing this for several decades, and now with the taper in the K series, they've really created instruments that for their size are quite powerful, which is something that Kawai's were never really known for back in the 70s and 80s. It was always like, well, the Yamaha's got more punch and more guts, and the current K series, and particularly their GX Grands, have just obliterated that old, outdated reputation. The feel on the K500 versus the 130 is also quite different. The K500 has longer key sticks in it than the 130 does. I mentioned that the 130 felt to me very similar to a Yamaha. The key stick length is fairly typical. It's a proven design that has been around for 30, 40 years. It's regulated really well. The K series has this lengthened key, which is designed to, I guess, overcome a few things. One is that it reduces the difference in control when you're playing out here versus when you're playing out there, because if you're just lengthening the overall thing, then proportionally speaking, it's less percentage that you're traveling when you're going from the outside to the inside of the key. So that's one benefit. Second benefit is that you actually give yourself a little bit more control when you're playing in the lower dynamic ranges. And this is something philosophically that Kawai's been all about for decades, is giving players more control in the softer, quieter parts of the playing experience. So let's start talking about treble, mid, bass, just as we did on the Fridolin. So the K500 has a duplex. This is different than the rest of the K series. So this is not something you're going to find on the K400, K300, K200, but you do find it on the K500 and the K800. And so that is that extra little section of string that is free and available to resonate sympathetically within the piano. And it thickens up and it makes it a little more colorful, the treble. So as I was saying on the Fridolin, its attack is a little less focused than the Kawai. The Kawai is definitely more punchy, but then there's a little less wash on the Kawai. So you get these kind of spikes in harmonic color, you know, when you're playing the treble. But it also is a little bit of a sharper treble. And so I can see people whose ears would definitely prefer something where the F130 is delivering a more mellow attack and really this beautiful kind of warm hug of slightly lower treble harmonics than what is happening up here. In the mid-range of the Kawai, way more dynamic than what I'm getting on the 130. There's just more color, there's a lot to work with there. So the mid-range is a lot, as I said, more dynamic. You're getting more color, and when we say color, we're really talking about lots of different levels of harmonic expression that's happening off the fundamentals. So you're getting some nice trebles, you're getting sort of something around the second, third partial is nice in there, fundamentals nice and strong. Really not much not to like about the mid-range of the K500. Really quite beautiful and full-bodied. Now, this is where I think the 130 has outdone the K500 is, although I think that the K500 transitions well between its mid-range down to the bass is a lot more brassy, and so you do have a different tone in the bass in the K500 than you do in the mid-range. So while I think the transition has been really well done, I don't think you're going to hit any particular note in there where you're getting these uncontrolled harmonics. You do have slightly two different characters between the mid and the bottom. On the Fridolin, it's really a very nice homogeneous character. And you're either going to like that or you're not going to like that. I've talked to so many people who on grand pianos like the bottom few octaves to just be almost orchestrally like a different instrument for their left hand, especially if they're improvisers or playing something, you know, a particular style might just call for this a little bit more. Other people like the instrument to be exactly the same tone top to bottom with very, very little differentiation. Both these hammers have mahogany core hammers, double felted hammers on them. And so what I like is no matter how hard you push the K500 or the F130, you really aren't getting a whole lot of distortion in either one. The hammer comes off the string really nice and quickly. The K500 has some it's just kind of, honestly, it's weird, it's interesting, it's whatever it is. There's this piece of foam on the rest rail inside the K500 that's designed to absorb the bounce back on the hammer shank quicker so that the whole overall mechanism will reset. And I can confirm to you that the K500 does have a faster repetition speed than the F130. And so in this regard, I think you're talking about an instrument that is better suited for high-end classical. I do think that if you were somebody who only had the space in their apartment or in your home or whatever, and this was either for your son or daughter or for yourself, and one of the things you were enjoying playing or you were aspiring to do is achieve a fairly high level of classical playing, and an upright piano is all you have space for, and this is the budget that works for you, I think you're going to find yourself more satisfied by the K500. For people who are a little more casual, either in their kind of classical goals, you're not really going hardcore for that, and it's something you're either returning to just to enjoy for yourself. I think it's more of a very subjective call between two very different tones. Both have wonderful sustain as well. Another thing that I give both credit to is a slight update to the styling on the cabinet. The K-Series received a contemporary oomph. The lines, the bevels, everything was redone, and this piano now feels a lot more European in terms of its styling. There was a nice departure away from that kind of that look that we're all so used to on like the U1 with the rounded gables and the specific bevels. And the F130, as I'm sure you saw in the first segment of this video, had some beautiful contemporary just design cues and lines to it. It's a really, really attractive cabinet. So they're both going to be a nice accent to your living room, and as so many of these comparisons, it comes down to your own use case. Better classical, probably a more aggressive performer generally, versus the F130, where you've got something where it's super easy to control. Much easier to control if you're not a fairly advanced player. Nice cabinet resonance coming out of the F130. Really beautiful balance between the attack and the sustain. Whereas the K500 is just a beast. It's going to give you a lot more sound, but you do need to kind of know what you're doing to control all of that extra sound. So once again, thank you so much for watching us at Merriam Pianos on YouTube. Really, we enjoy making these comparison videos probably more than anything else. It's a chance for us to share all of these little different corners of our piano world with you. And so please leave a comment, please let us know what you thought. And if you have not subscribed yet, we would so appreciate it if you hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so you can become part of our ever-growing community of piano lovers, and we will see you back for more videos shortly. My name's Stu Harrison, this has been Merriam Pianos on YouTube. We'll see you again soon.